to welcome all attendees, speakers, and moderators, and especially I also want to welcome the co-moderators of this webinar. For all of us, it's a new experience, and this experience is related definitely to COVID-19. But my co-moderators are Xavier Matias-Guiu and Professor Marco Santucci from Italy. I want to emphasize that the importance of this webinar for pathologists at this stage is that we want to organize a series of webinars on potential topics which will be inspired by the ESP working groups and related to the current situation, which affects all pathologies all over Europe and across the world. We thought that we choose a title which is related to COVID-19. Especially, we want to thank AstraZeneca for their kind support of this activity and welcome their attendees through this live streaming. I want to ask all the attendees to send their questions or comments via the chat box that can be addressed during the overall discussion after all the presentations. And we will not make a break between the presentations, and there will be no audio interference for the audience. We want to record this webinar, and this will be available later for ESP members. Herewith, I want to hand over to the chair of the ESP Advisory Board, and this is Marco Santucci. And please, do you also want to welcome the audience?
Yes, of course. Ladies and gentlemen and dear colleagues, first of all, good afternoon. I too wish to welcome you all to this webinar on COVID-19. Nowadays, we are confronted with a global healthcare challenge that involves all European countries. It's therefore of utmost importance to active participation and contribution of the members of the Advisory Board of the European Society of Pathology. In this light, our society has invited representatives of the most affected countries in Europe to present and share with us both the challenges they were confronted to and the experience they gained. I warmly wish to invite other members of the Advisory Board to contribute and send their comments and proposals for potential topics to be addressed in future webinars. Thank you. And now I introduce Xavier Matias-Guiu.
Yeah, just to thank the European Society of Pathology for organizing that session, also to thank AstraZeneca, and particularly AstraZeneca Spain, for the support. And as President and the President of the Advisory Board have said, this is a good opportunity for us, the representative of the national societies, to share experiences and try to think a little bit about what has happened, but also, quite importantly, what's going to happen in the next months and years. So really, I'm very happy having that meeting. Thank you very much.
Introduction to the COVID-19 disease. I hope, just a moment. I try to present my screen. but I get a message that I cannot start the screen share, while other members have their screen sharing active. So please let me know if you see my screen.
No, I see your face, but not the screen.
So I try to share my screen. Could you stop your screen share, Marco?
Sure, stop video. Okay.
Okay, do you see my screen now?
Yes, I see your screen.
Okay, and all the others the same thing, yes? Okay, so you see my screen and you hear me, yes?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to give a short overview about the disease and the relevance of the disease for the community and and for pathology in detail. And this slide represents electron microscopy image, which has been published in Lancet Respiratory Medicine in this year, and it shows viral particles in alveolar type 2 cells. So I think this is a contribution of pathology that we can show the world the enemy as a picture. And what you realize, or what you have to realize, that for the moment we see some electron microscopic structures, and at the moment it is relatively controversial if these are true viral particles, but most of the publications at the moment, and there are many new publications discussing these virus-like particles in different organs. So the other thing of what is demonstrated with this image is that these viral-like particles have identified in alveolar type 2 cells, and this is probably the entrance point of the virus into the body. And we thought for many months now that this is a lung disease, because most of the patients were delivered to the hospital with severe acute respiratory syndrome, and this is what the disease got his name from. So here you see some CT scans of patients with COVID-19 at the beginning of the disease, and these images came from China, and this is a typical picture that you have bilateral lung involvement and a diffuse distribution in the lung, ground glass opacity, and no septal thickening. And there were less common changes. These were nodules, pleural effusions, and in principle, there were no signs of chronic disease. So the important thing is we were discussing here a disease, a new disease with main lung involvement. What also came out is that there are different disease intensities. We have people with mild symptoms, severe symptoms, and very critical patients. 14% had severe status with very heavy lung infiltrates, and 5% had a very critical ill status with mechanical ventilation and shock. And this is mainly this sort of patients what we see in pathology. So in principle, these patients who die in the hospital. What is less known for us in pathology is that the clinicians, they already have a staging proposal proposed here in the Journal of Heart and Lung Transplantation, where the disease starts with a viral response phase at the beginning, and then they already give chloroquine or remdesivir but there is a reduced immunosuppression. But after a specific time course, you have an increasing inflammatory response phase, and in stage 3, there is a hyperinflammation phase, which is associated with diffuse alveolar damage, with shock, and especially with cardiac failure. But still, most people talk about the disease as a lung disease. And here you have the first summary in the Lancet with the symptoms and complications of most patients. At admission, they have dyspnea, then they have acute ARDS in principle, and then they go into the intensive care unit. So here you have the typical symptoms: cough, sputum production, diarrhea, and then we have experiences from China, and this has been published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and this is also now around the press and in all media, that most of the patients with COVID-19 and with severe symptoms have diabetes, hypertension, and somehow cardiovascular diseases. And this is probably something specific for COVID-19, and most of the patients with severe disease are male sex. So when you look to New York, here are also the first data. You see the same distribution. More than 50% have hypertension. Many have obesity and diabetes, and this is somehow interesting that these patients have these comorbidities with cardiovascular disease as a top 1 disease group. So this brings up the question, is COVID-19 also identified in 2 autopsies and in 1 resection of the small body? A very interesting morphology. And what we have seen in these autopsies cases was a very prominent endotheliitis in the lung as well as in the small bowel. So we have seen there these small thrombi in the small bowel, and many patients here in the hospital Zurich got a small bowel resection together with a COVID-19 infection. And what you see here on this slide in the center is the lung, and we have seen these prominent apoptotic bodies, and we have made here an immunohistochemistry for caspase 3, and this is a typical marker for apoptosis, and these were definitely apoptotic bodies where are stained by immunohistochemistry, showing us this endothelitis in the lung as well as in the small bowel. And in our autopsies, we have also seen them in the heart, in the liver, as well as in the kidney. So in our eyes, this is a very prominent picture. And in our electron microscopy study, we think that we have also identified virus-like particles in endothelial cells. So our postulation here is that there are specific endothelitis in the body, and here we have endothelitis also in the myocardium. Here you see these lymphocytes and the endothelial cells, but no typical lymphocytic myocarditis in these autopsy cases. So to wrap it up, I think that meanwhile, many data, this is just a recent publication in Cell from last week, when they also could show in endothelial organoids that the virus can use the endothelial cell as an entry point or entry cell into the body. So our hypothesis is that COVID-19 is not only a lung disease, it can be a generalized disease. We propose here endothelial cells as one of the virus reservoir, and an endotheliitis is somehow related to the disease, but it is necessary that we perform now research study to better understand the hyperinflammatory phase and to better understand the lymphatic reaction of the body to the virus. So this is my conclusion, that COVID-19 infection is characterized by an inflammatory response phase. This inflammatory response phase is in principle associated with a high mortality. The disease hits patients with pre-existing cardiovascular disease and probably with a diseased microvasculature. This makes reasonable that patients with diabetes and with cardiac failure are at increased risk for a bad outcome. This could somehow be associated with the distribution of the ACE2 receptor, and the endothelium is probably important for regulation of the vascular tone and the vascular hemostasis. So we think that the inflammation is associated with a poor coagulant state. This could also explain the frequent observation of lung emboli and thrombosis in large vessels, but in our opinion, a pre-existing endothelial dysfunction, this is hypertension, diabetes, and obesity, is the reason for the particular vulnerability